Right then, let's move on to the second section, which is the rise of the cyber brand, as I'm calling it. And what this really relates to is how brands from the traditional sense of branding have shifted. And they've shifted because that we have moved from this period traditionally of where you have traditional physical branding and physical space to the development of cyberspaces. This again links back to the 80s where we saw the rise of computer and processor power. It really starts to accelerate in the 80s. In the 90s, we get obviously the birth, if you like, of the web. And at that time, we then start to see this notion of connectivity appearing and the development of these new worlds. Now, of course, we are now talking about how we have a network computing infrastructure, and this notion of connectivity is embedded in everything, it seems, and soon we would say in everyone. What I'm really saying here is that brands have had to shift. They've had to change in their strategy and how they deal with that. And we'll see that as we go here. So here's a simple wee quote here, a couple of quotes. And this is really interesting because this is Rushkoff in 1997. And he coins the term screenagers. Right? Now you talk about teenagers, but he's talking about screenagers. And he's saying this is the screen age. Everybody's living through screens. Now we can see this today if you walk down the street or if you go into the pub or if you're on the train or the bus. People's heads are constantly in screens, whether it be mobile or tablet. We're never off the screen. So Rushkoff is definitely bang on. Again, here's me and a chap called David McGilvray, who's a professor at the University of West Scotland. And we coined this term of an oculocentric and techno-dependent society. What we were arguing is we were constantly seeing, interestingly through events, because that's what we were studying at the time, we were seeing that basically technologies had become dependent in everyday life. People really, they just took them as a given, and ocular centricity means that they live through the eyes. The eyes had become the predominant sense, if you like. Everything was driven through, it had to be visual, basically. And you can see how that works. Those of you who are interested in events, you can see how that works in events. It's very important to have the aesthetic, ocular-centric element of events. Another one I was pushing here is this idea is that we've actually now find ourselves in this new mode of sociability. And a very easy way of thinking about this is what does it mean to be social? And a simple way of thinking about it is, I would put this to you, what does it mean in cyberspace or cyberspaces when you think of friends? Okay, if you think of friends or you think of relationships and what it is to be social and friendly, what we can see is we see that there's a new mode of sociability, that cyberspace has changed how we interact online. And this is obviously relating to social media. You see, today we have obviously a proliferation of social media. I think I've said to you before, is I could probably give you about 500 different platforms of social media. I know we talk about the usual stuff such as Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, you've got Google Plus now, Twitter, etc., Pinterest. But the fact is there's easily well over about 500 plus platforms, and it's just constantly a growing process. But when we talk about social media, what do we talk about? Well, this is the classic way of thinking about. These are just technological platforms that enable open, mobile, immediate, interactive and collaborative environments. Now, sorry, that notion of immediacy and mobility is very, very important when it comes to branding. I'll leave that with you. We can maybe think about that later in the tutorial. But mobility and immediacy are really, really important, obviously, as is interactivity or engagement, as we'll see later. The key thing is what we're saying is brands have had to shift because we have now entered a totally different technological age. We don't just have the web. We're now in what we call this area of big data. But here's a classic quote here from Eric Schmidt, the executive chairman of Google. Now look at this when he talks about this issue of exabytes of data. Now this is these huge amount of data that we've produced. Now he gives that classic quote. He says, from the dawn of civilization that we've produced 5 exabytes. You don't need to know how big it is, but just think about it, that since he's arguing here, obviously, that humankind has only created this 5 exabytes of data since humankind really appeared as a civilization. And now he's saying we produce 5 exabytes every 2 days, just as an example to say how quickly the age of acceleration is actually moving, and often people are oblivious to this. And it's really important for you guys, from a digital marketeer or for events, to really get your head round about this, about how this then impacts on brands, because we're now in the era of big data. Now that means that they can clearly profile you, because that's exactly what happens. Every time you go into Google, every time you do searching, you're being profiled. Your cultural tastes are being profiled, and brands are tapping into that. I coined a term some time ago. I called it, we now live in these issues of cultures of co-created convergence. This is simply where we converge online and we create a culture. Now, I'll mention later what I mean by that, by cultures, the way of life, but a different way of life and how we live online. But it's a co-created process between not just you and me, right? Not just a collective, but by our whole social networks, all interacting and engaging all at the same time. And the question is, what does that mean for brands?